there's no point having perfect systems if you haven't got any sales.
So you've got to try and get the balance right between marketing and sales.
Yep. Make sure you take time to work on your business rather than in it.
Just work everybody you know. Talk to everybody you know. Make sure they know what you do.
Your brand is much more personal, isn't it, when you're a smaller company?
So seen anything scary on Instagram recently? Or indeed anywhere else?
That's a dangerous question to ask me.
That might be quite revealing.
I have unique algorithms.
They've written one just for you. There's probably an algorithm. If Richard Buckle do this, if not, do everybody else.
Do it. No, I have seen some rather terrifying robotic stuff at the moment, I think. And you're never sure now whether it's AI. My default is to think that's AI.
Right.
But to then look at it. But there's been some that have, and I couldn't tell. It looked like it was a proper robot.
So go on. There was one you were showing me earlier.
The muscular skeleton of a whole human.
Yeah.
That was terrifying. But the one I showed you was the kid with the arm, that he was controlling it with his mind.
Yeah. So he had something strapped onto his head picking up brain signals.
Yeah.
And then you couldn't tell, could you? But the idea was he wasn't in any way touching anything to do what's going on. It could have been a made up AI fraudy thing. But if you were to believe it, they've got the robot being controlled by his thought signals.
But it's like the Neuralink stuff as well, isn't it? That's I read an article about the first guy who implanted that. And it's fascinating. They have to build a special robot just to do the surgery.
Because it's so intricate.
Because it's so intricate. And what they hadn't realised was that, so they put like about 1,000, apparently this stuff has been around since the 90s, 80s and 90s.
Right.
But it was quite crude. And then what they've done now is they've obviously enhanced it. There's about 1,000 different like wires that were going into the head that were like half the thickness of a human hair or something, which was crazy thin. But what they hadn't realised was that just the fact of breathing would be enough to dislocate them out of the brain.
Oh my goodness!
They hadn't factored that in. So after about 3 months, the first chappie had lost about 85% of his ability to do stuff. It was slowing down, lagging, all that kind of stuff. So they eventually reprogrammed the software and managed to do that. So later, I think they're on to the 3rd or 4th human test now, and they've factored that in and all of that. But there's some phenomenal,
scary
things happening.
I wonder if there's some way eventually you'll be able to tell whether something's been AI generated, because it's so good now. You really have to assume that it's not true.
Well, all this AI and robotic stuff, I think we're heading for some great Olympics. I think we're going to have the normal Olympics,
and then the open,
and then just do what I want to see someone do the 100 meters in like 4 seconds.
What you can do in a car?
high jump. We're talking buildings.
Ironman. We could have Ironman Olympics.
Just whatever you need to do, whether it's bionic, whether it's chemical, whatever. Let's have the special kind of enhanced superhuman Olympics.
That would make good telly, I suppose.
So yeah.
Okay, scary enough then.
Terrifying stuff.
You heard it here first. Well, probably not actually. Depends what Instagram you're watching. You can follow Richard's feed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, maybe we better do a podcast before that goes too far down that dark alley. We don't know where it's going to go. Hello and welcome to another episode of the SME Growth Podcast from Wellmeadow, where every week we try and come up with something interesting or useful or just every now and again a bit humorous to help those owners and managers of small and medium-sized enterprises or small and medium-sized businesses, depending which flavour you prefer. I'm Dave Parry, and with me is Rich Buckle every week. And tell me, Rich, what episode number are we on?
I believe this one is 110.
110.
110.
There we go. Apologies to last week as well for regular listeners. The audio quality was just a little off, not quite up to our usual standards.
If you're watching on YouTube, I'm now in focus.
And hopefully, Rich, in the past we took an editorial decision to blur him slightly. But he's sharpened up his act, trimmed his beard, so we thought we'll put him back in focus again. For those of you that decide to subject yourself to the YouTube version of our podcast. Good. So anyway, go on, tell us quickly what this week's about, and then we'll do the last three.
So this week we're going to talk about what the difference is between growing a small company and a large company.
And difference between selling and growing if you're in a small company or if you're in a large company.
A large company.
Okay.
It was prompted through, how did we come back with this?
This was a discussion with Tracy, who's going to be a guest on our podcast in a few weeks' time. And it's something that she has a specialism in growing small companies. And it made me realize that our experience is generally what she would call large companies. We would think our normal spot is 5 million to 25 million turnover with a bit either side of that. Whereas her expertise is more the sort of sub 100K turnover. So what we would regard as very small, couldn't afford us type companies.
And so we should say that there's lots of other good stuff that Tracy's going to come on and talk about. We haven't just rocked the podcast.
That's all she was going to talk about. So we're really interested in her advice on small companies. And she's going to cover some stuff on imposter syndrome and all that sort of thing. So that's exciting. But that triggered our own thought on this one, just as we were thinking, that's interesting. Her business is distinct from ours in that she focuses on the smaller companies. So that's where it came from. So go on then, what were the last few?
So last three,
what people missed?
109 was around recruitment and our recruitment process that we developed many, many years ago and is still available for free on the website.
And is still in use, actually, today.
And it's still in use to this day.
Some clients of ours still use it. Yeah.
So that was just a kind of bit of a round robin on what to do if you're looking to recruit, particularly around this kind of current economic landscape where probably thinking about selection should be higher up the agenda for people. 108 was dirty data.
Dirty data. Which isn't quite as exciting as you might think, or is more exciting than you would think.
So that was a strategic look off the back of looking at lots of people's CRMs and indeed our own, where I culled out half of the contacts the other day and cleaned them up and...
Only to put another load in yesterday. But that's another story.
That's a whole other podcast. That
might have been an accidental.
We might have to wait. We might have to wait until certain issues are resolved on that before it becomes public.
Okay. I love a teaser.
And
good.
And then so 107 was when should you quit? When should you persevere? So that was inspired by Seth Godin's book.
Are you in a dip or in a cul-de-sac?
Dip or a cul-de-sac.
And that's where we said the people all over the world are resigning on the back of listening to our podcast. But we blame Seth Godin. It's just a review.
I imagine most people have quit the podcast by now.
Not worth just hanging on in there. Okay, good. So thanks for that. That's a good summary of what people have missed. So as you know, if you've listened to this podcast or watching it on YouTube and you fancy some of those, it's available on all good podcast outlets and on YouTube videos and shorts. Excellent. Okay, so this week then, what is the difference between selling if you're doing so from a small company versus a big company? And maybe for the purposes of this discussion, we'll define small as less than $1 million rather than that much more sort of early stage startup that we were talking before, the 100 grand. So anything up to $1 million. So what's going to be the difference with that? And what strikes me straight away is obviously size of team and amount of resources you've got and that sort of thing. But there's an attitudinal difference, a structural difference. There's even the bit at the beginning, which is where as a startup or a small company owner and manager, you've got to decide how much effort you put into sales as opposed to marketing, as opposed to just delivery and rely on referrals and luck. Yeah.
And I think at that size as well, you're at that... there's always a danger as well. Maybe this is more startup, but I think there's a danger as well when you're at that size of... Do you build the perfect system or do you focus on sales? And there's always going to be a bit of a tension, but there's no point having perfect systems if you haven't got any sales.
Yeah, and I remember that lesson very early on, 20 years ago when we started up this fine venture. Because I came from a manufacturing background, my instinct was to put some systems in place. And as my MD told me at the time, he said, why don't you wait until you got a customer first and then worry about that. It is a bit chicken and egg, but you haven't got the luxury really of designing everything at the beginning. You just need a customer.
Yep.
So it still starts from there. And I think the problem with that, and I remember it very keenly at the time, that at the beginning, 100% of your time is available for sales. Because you're not distracted by having to do anything. And then if you're lucky or however it works, you start picking up your first few clients and you end up in this feast and famine cycle. Because I bet you in the early days you overcommit and you certainly over-deliver because you're trying to impress, but also you're not being dragged into other clients all the time. Yeah. And so you end up in this feast and famine cycle where you end up having no work at all and then getting enough to fill your time but stop marketing or selling, and then you go around the cycle again. Yeah. So you end up in this horrible sort of sine wave, which you've got to try and break out of. So we remember that back in the early days, but a long time ago now. But it is a challenge for startups. I get that.
Yep.
So you start out then, and you've got to try and make all sorts of decisions, I think. It's assuming you've got some basic marketing in place. You've got to try and get the balance right, haven't you, between marketing and sales?
Yep.
But let's say you've got enough basic marketing there. So you've got a website, you've got a social presence, you're doing something at least to outreach and keep some presence, maybe in networking groups or email marketing or whatever you're doing. You're doing something like that. So the question then is, do you double down on that and do just loads and loads of marketing and rely on inbound? So you see that a lot where people are on LinkedIn all day long, just posting on people's stuff, just having a presence, waiting for someone to take the bait and give you a ring and say, oh, I know, that sounds interesting to do for me. Or whether you divert a bit more of your time, and the question then is how much of your time, to deliberately old-fashioned sales, outreach, prospecting, go and meet strangers. In the old days, it would have been knocking on doors, wearing out shoe leather and tyre rubber, and going around industrial estates if you're B2B and that sort of thing. Or whether you work the phones, or whatever you do. It's how you get that balance, isn't it?
I think a point there as well, maybe comparing a larger company. So for each of those things you just said, you would have maybe more specialised roles. So you'd have maybe a team or even at least a person doing each of those things, doing marketing, outreach, cold calling, whatever, business development. When you're on your own or smaller team, you might have to wear multiple hats at the same time. And I think that's quite a difficult job to do, to switch from being in marketing mode to sales mode to delivery mode.
Well, just look at the org chart of a large company in its sales areas, because you'll probably have some sort of sales director or chief sales officer at the top, and then you'll have maybe a national sales manager, regional sales managers, and sales managers to have the hierarchy coming down as the territories are split up. And for each of those areas, you may distinguish between business development managers, account executives that will help work for them internally, account managers, key account managers, and then maybe a sales assistant to help, just everything admin wise. And that's before you've got onto the marketing department. Usually the sales in a bigger firm. So that's an awful lot of people I've just listed there, given that each of those titles will have multiple people at it. So you could have a firm of, let's say 10,000 people. It may well have a sales population of many hundreds to help feed the machine. You've got that big structure, which means you can all be fairly specialised. If you're a biz dev person, you're definitely going to have a very different shape of your day compared to an account exec or a key account manager or someone internally in admin. And that's what disappears when you're small. You've got to somehow think, how many of those hats can I wear at once? Am I going to be prospecting? Am I going to be looking after existing customers? Am I going to be doing cold outreach and all that? And it doesn't suit everybody. The reason that in bigger firms it works better is because everyone can settle into their specialism. But trying to find someone to do all of that, and maybe they don't want to do selling at all. Maybe the reason they're in a small business is because they want to do the delivery, but they've suddenly got to do some of this outreach or salesy stuff. So that's the first thing I think you notice, is that the structure, by being smaller, you've got to have some really deep down thinking about which bit of all of those roles am I going to have to give up on, which bits will I do.
Maybe it becomes more of a, just thinking from a small business perspective, maybe it's more of a time, right, you can't do all of those roles, obviously full time, because we've just listed like 7 different roles, 8 different roles. So, but maybe it's more of a, one strategy could be just time management and blocking out, well, I'm going to do 2 hours of biz dev, 2 hours of key account management, 2 hours of outreach, and think about it. The roles are still important, but it's not so much a role, it's more of a focus of a couple of hours a week or a month or whatever it is.
And do as much as you can in that time slice. So if you're right, if you then try to splice your week up and allowing for the fact that you've got to do some delivery, maybe in the middle of some admin and stuff, maybe you're only spending a day a week on your sales activities. Maybe not even that if you're in a small firm. So in percentage terms, then try and split up maybe half your time on trying to get new people into your funnel, top of funnel type stuff. So that's your outreach, prospecting, and maybe some of the lead magnet stuff in your marketing, maybe. You've got to have something in there to manage the existing pipeline. The worst thing ever is you put all the effort in to get someone into your pipeline. You've got a deal that's running live. It's in flight, as they say. And then you forget the fact that you've got to do that discovery call or follow up and produce the quote or chase the quote or whatever it may be. So you've got to probably spend a certain slug of time doing that. And then what a lot of people forget is the back end, where you've got to look after people that you know, that you maybe done work with before, or who could refer people to you. And as we've said before on these podcasts, for a lot of smaller businesses, and especially service-based businesses, that can be a more lucrative area to spend your time than the front end, where you try and find people to put into the funnel yourself, cold outreach. Instead of that, just work everybody you know, talk to everybody you know, make sure they know what you do.
But I would say systemize that.
Yes.
And I think that's what we've seen over the last 3 months, just internally, by focusing and systemizing that approach, which is an evolving thing. But it does make it has a huge impact when you actually systemize things.
Yeah, and just to fill that in a little bit, it's basically categorizing all the people you know, and then probably properly racking your brains about who do I actually know but I haven't written down, who's not even in my phone book, but they're a friend of a friend, or someone who I wouldn't have thought of as a business contact, but they could be, or someone you've done business with, suppliers maybe. They're not people you would regard as normal people to have in your CRM or your outreach. And yet they could be the people, absolutely, that would find someone for you. And we had that experience today. Rob, thanks a lot out there for fitting our new digital signage into our front window. That's been great, and everybody's been commenting on how lovely it is. But since he came in and he had to look at what's on the digital signage, he got a greater awareness of what we're doing, went to his next appointment and mentioned what we did, and suddenly we got a referral. So who would have thought?
Who would have thought, yeah. And I suppose that in that case it was... it's almost self-education as to what we do. But I think it's important, if you're thinking about the referral outreach, to say, well, how do you educate your referrers so that they know what to say about what you do?
Yeah.
So,
and then reward them, keep in touch with them, reciprocate, and all the things. So there's a certain amount about structure and how you split your time in a small firm to effectively be all of those different job titles we listed before, but in one person, which hats to wear.
And it's interesting as well, I just think, before we move on that point, we were talking to a couple of guys earlier this week about their business.
I'm trying to work out who you're going to talk about in a minute. I'll fall into place.
Our Wolverhampton friends.
Oh, yes, okay. Yeah.
And they were talking about spending too much time in the business rather than on the business. And that's just another, I think, thing here. It's really important to make the time when you're a small company to spend the time working on the business rather than in the business. It's really difficult sometimes to actually break away from that. Heard it used before, the metaphor of on the dance floor or on the balcony. Imagine, I'm more of a dance floor. I
just because you like dancing.
I do like a dance, but I can see you more on the balcony.
You think I'm on the balcony?
Are you balcony?
I think I'm on the balcony.
The balcony, looking down, kind of like just holding the drink.
Well, later on in the evening, maybe. Go down on the dance floor.
So
I'd probably start out by the bar, actually.
Well, I still haven't had a drop of alcohol this year.
Oh, here we go again. Why did I say that? I just knew I was going to trigger something. The righteous. How can you tell when someone's still on dry January in the middle of February? Well, March, here we are now.
March, exactly 3 months.
Gosh, you've made it into March. Don't go there. Move on.
But yeah, so just to say on that, all those different roles, thinking about your strategy, sales strategy, make sure you take time to work on your business rather than in it.
And so that's about roles. So the next thing that crops up is systems. Now, everyone's going to roll their eyes when we say, have you got CRM? Because they know that's what we do. But I do remember back in the day when I started out trying to grow the first client, you think, what's the point of having a CRM when I haven't even got any clients yet? And the number of ones I'm chasing is, I can count on one hand. I could write them on my hand in felt tip, and it was so small. You just don't think of the need for that. And even then, when you do, you think, well, I'll get a spreadsheet together and I'll keep some basic notes. But as we said last week with our friend John, who was using it even to manage the job hunt process, you can get free CRMs. Why wouldn't you use at least a free one? Because then it allows you to so if ever you wanted a bigger one, you can just upgrade it, pay your 15 quid a month or whatever it is. It's for small businesses, paying nothing and having a tool is and we all know it's a hook and bait thing, isn't it, from the big providers. They're giving you something free because they want to get you into their ecosystem. But it's no different to offering students free banking, is it? It's just all part of getting customers in early before they're really ready to spend money and then move up.
How I got my first credit card.
Yeah, I bet. Did you fill in the form honestly?
I got a free camera.
Wow.
Very attractive young lady.
You used to all sorts, didn't you, banking? Yeah. So processes and systems, having something to record it all into, and a CRM of some sort to do it. But that will help you then as you start to divide your time up between the prospecting, the pipeline management, the referral management, and everything else, marketing, whatever. Have it all in one place, however it is. And everyone knows that we're HubSpot people and we're going to push it, but it doesn't really matter if you don't like that, you want to go Pipedrive or Zoho or whatever, you're not likely to go a Salesforce, are you? Something like that as a startup, because that's big company stuff. But there's plenty of solutions out there that suit small companies just well, and the free versions work.
And I think when we talk about systems and CRMs and tools and things, there was that stat, I'm sure we've mentioned it before, that came out that said about in bigger companies, and maybe it's more SaaS, but for sales teams, the average spend was about $1,000 a month on tech stack in order to help you do your job.
Yeah, I mentioned that to someone the other day. Fell off the chair.
And yet for a small business, they might be spending that a year on the whole business.
If that. Yeah, depending on how many people you're talking about. But I think there's a real aversion. I'm not sure if it's a UK thing, because that's a US stat, isn't it? We know. But is there an aversion when you're small to not spending any money on anything, even if it clearly has a return on investment? But you're so focused on cost control. Yeah. And there's a business we've been chasing recently that desperately needs to do what we're offering to help them do to accelerate their sales. And they can see it themselves. But their own processes are holding them back because they can't get their head round spending that money in advance of seeing the benefits from it. And, you know, if you were more philanthropic, you'd almost just say, right, pay me afterwards then. But we've all got businesses to run, haven't we? So you've got to run it that way. But so there is this danger that you cut off your nose to spite your face a little bit. There's a certain amount of investment. It doesn't have to be £1,000 a month to start with, does it? It doesn't have to be. As I say, free tools out there. Yep. Have a go at what you can do. Make do amend. But bear in mind, you'll need to scale it as the business scales. And
we have done a whole episode on tech stack.
We have, yes. That's what I was looking up.
If anyone's interested in tech stack, I had quite a few people asking us what our tech stack is. Yeah. And that type of thing. So check that episode out.
Now, with all of those systems in the bigger companies, it's going to be much more rigid, and it has to be because it's got to be scalable. So you'll be onboarded differently as a new salesperson in a big organization with 100 salespeople. You'll be giving your sales training on the products and the processes. You'll be told what the pipeline structure looks like, how you engage here, how you qualify, what you're allowed to do. There'll be playbooks for how you do certain things. There might be battle cards written up for how you answer questions when compared against different competitors, and it'll all be there for you, and it should be easy. And you may even have a separate lead generation department, and you just get served up leads to make contact with and sell. A very, very different type of life, really, of selling compared to that small business person who's just trying to get their head around all the different aspects of how a sales cycle works. Probably haven't even really worked out what your value proposition is and how you express that, who your ideal customers are. Yeah. So you can easily spend way too much time talking to people who love talking to you back, but are never going to buy. Yeah. So I think it's more critical than ever in a small firm to be very disciplined in qualifying out the leads that don't meet your ICP, your ideal customer profile. Yeah. But it's very hard to do. Because when you haven't got enough deal volume, you end up overwashing the car. You know, you just want to keep talking to people who, I can't believe it, someone's picked up the phone and they're actually engaging with me. You would still be better off spending that time trying, even if you fail initially, trying to find some new people to talk to.
Yep. I was on a Score app webinar earlier this week, and they were talking about building, how to find elite clients, and that's that sweet spot, and that will look different for every business. But it was all around elite clients are in that kind of 2x2 grid of quantity of leads or consistency of leads, and then quality in terms of how that fits your ideal customer profile. And the elite clients are in the kind of upper right quadrant on that. And that is about absolutely understanding who it is that you're looking to work with, what problems you're going to solve. And I think for maybe small businesses, particularly startups, you are still trying to refine what is our pitch, what are we solving, what you think you might solve might be something completely different.
What's the pain I think I'm getting rid of here, and what actually is it the case? Yeah. So that's that one. The other thing I think that large companies get a bit hampered by, but for reasons that are completely understandable, is the flexibility around pricing and bundling and decision making. How do you get a deal approved to be able to quote it? Whereas in a small firm, especially if it's just you effectively being in charge of it, you can be very, very flexible. Yeah. Once again, big red flag here. You are going to be tempted to drop your prices to win more work initially. Do whatever you can to resist that temptation. If people don't value it, if you don't value it, and if you drop the price to win the work, you'll never be able to build it up again. So there is a reason why larger firms have quite strict controls over how much can be discounted and how we go around doing things. Try and sell your value as a small person in another way. You've probably already got lower rates anyway, just because you've got lower overheads. Yeah. But don't let the buyer on the other end abuse the fact that they know you want the work and beat you down to the point where it's just not going to work. And our friend who we were talking to earlier in the week did a software project and ended up completely getting taken advantage of, just well, I don't know if that's true, got took advantage of. It was a mixture of communication on both sides where scope crept and wasn't controlled and ended up, because he's a small business and he wanted to say yes, and the buyer was in probably a stronger position, and it ended up not working out all very well, which is a shame, isn't it? Because both sides meant well.
I think if you do find that you've got to drop your price, that's got to correspond to the scope as well, and there will come a point of diminishing returns on that in terms of
what's left.
Like, what's the point? But it's and some of it is just trying to find the right price in the market, isn't it, for what you're trying to do? There's a price experimentation, but view it as price experimentation rather than I'm just going to keep slashing just so I get this job. And value yourself properly and understand what the market price is, what people are paying for bigger firms out there. Because just because you're a smaller firm doesn't mean you'll do less good a job. Sometimes you'll do a better job, especially if you're coming at this from a position of expertise. They'll effectively getting the MD to deliver their work for them, whereas in a bigger firm, you'd never get that. If you market yourself as boutique,
then you can double your prices.
Then you can double, triple.
Booty. Very good.
Prices.
So that's about pricing and the decision making and how flexible you can be on pricing, but don't let that go too far, is what we're saying with that. Don't let that abuse you. But something around the brand, you're not going to have anywhere near the brand credibility as a smaller firm. So you've got to make up for that in other ways. You know, the classic never got fired for buying IBM problem. Small businesses can't compete with that. But they can offer the fact that the person you're talking to now in the sales process is the person that will stay with you through this journey as the main deliverer. And that doesn't happen in the big firm. No. Your lead gen will pass over to the closers will pass over to the customer onboarding team, then the client success team will get involved, and then service delivery, and before you know it, you've forgotten who it was you're talking to. So you've got to play those strengths, haven't you?
Indeed.
In fact, I saw something the other day, I think it might have been on Instagram, just another clever prompts to use ChatGPT for, which is always good just to see how you're doing it. Yeah. And someone was suggesting just type in, if you know you've got a particular weakness in the workplace, in your makeup, whatever it is, just write in, I've got a weakness of blah, 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 blah. Tell me how I turn that into a strength in this situation, blah, 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 blah. And it really prompts you to reframe what you think of as a weakness. It doesn't need to be.
Too much of a perfectionist.
Well, that's that interview answer, isn't it? Got too high standards, yeah.
But I think as well, maybe on the whole brand thing, there is. So Mrs. Buckle used to work for Unilever, and she would sell things like Hellmann's mayonnaise and all that kind of thing, and that sort of thing does sell itself because you are selling a brand, and
someone else has done the hard yards.
And you're just going in. But I do think as well, like your brand is much more personal, isn't it, when you're a smaller company? I think, but there is a danger that you can confuse your brand for a logo.
True.
A lot of people are prepared to spend an awful lot of money on logos and things like that, and sometimes at the early stages you don't really need that. It's more about your brand will be more, do you do what you say you're going to do?
It makes my heart sink when I see startups spending their first £2,000 on a logo design. And apologies to those very good friends we have out there that are very good at logo designs. That's not to say that it's not a good one that they get for the money, but it's a bit like spending your last $5 on a wallet, nothing to put in it. And it's a real shame to see that the priority that some companies give is the outward-looking. Maybe it's a bit, I don't know, self-serving, narcissistic, or just that you feel you have to do that. And trying to look like a big firm before you are. I think there's a lot of customers out there that will forgive you for just being who you are, and if you're genuine and you've got value to add, they don't mind if your website's just a bit of a startup one-pager and you haven't got business cards yet. Whatever they are. Something we used to have when we were young. Apparently.
Business cards, for all the millennials. They are.
Exactly.
This is a paper that we used to write our...
What did you do that for, Grandad?
Paper that we used to write our contact details on.
So then I think the other sort of main differences are a bit more guessable. It's the flexibility that you have in terms of how you can package deals up, and we already talked about pricing, isn't it, how we deliver it, that sort of thought leadership that you bring along, but also the relationships that you build with some of the customers in those early days. Because you've got that continuity between the selling and the delivery, you end up getting a lot stronger referral on the back of that, because people can see that you're doing. I think you also get a lot more sympathy, or I don't know if sympathy is the right word. Is it that? You tell me. It's when someone sees they're dealing with a small business that's really good at what they do, but really early stages trying to make something of themselves and do something. I certainly feel that I want to help. I think this is you I'm helping. Whereas if, a bit massive company comes in trying to sell to me, I appreciate that the person that's actually trying to sell to me is a paid employee that will be here today, gone tomorrow maybe. And it's, even if I was to give that business more work, the individual might get a kicker on their commission or something, but it's not really fundamentally changing their lives in the way that when you buy off a small business, it definitely does.
There's definitely an engagement piece, isn't it? We were talking to our new friend Duncan this morning, who was talking about psychology of teams and putting us through our paces in terms of
that's a good session.
Our team dynamics and everything else.
Good mix of the science of how people learn and what they get joy from in work and how you get your work life to work well. I found that quite interesting.
And I think there was something, I can't remember what I was going to talk about now from that, to do with the level of engagement. That was it. And the whole Gallup polls, which are fairly well known in terms of, but I think probably what's not so well known is how much research they do.
Yeah.
So the stats around the engagement, around, sort of 20% of people are actually engaged in their work and 50% are actively quitting and all that kind of thing. They're fairly well booted around, but that's off the back of tens of millions of people being questioned and all of that. So pretty robust stuff. But I think you are far more likely to get that real sense of engagement and going the extra mile with a smaller company than you'll get with a large company.
And I think we had a lead once, didn't we? It came to us deliberately because we weren't one of the big guys. We weren't one of the elite partners in the HubSpot world, because he knew that a smaller company would be more dedicated to giving him that better level of service. Yeah, very good. Some other good stuff came out of that session. There's a whole podcast in there, I feel. Another one, probably the last couple we'll pick up on just on this because we're running out of time. The sales training that you get in a big firm and a small firm is like night and day. Yeah. Clearly, you'll be onboarded, like we said earlier. You'll be taught about the products and all the battle cards and everything. When you're in a small company, you just got to learn on the job, and you'll be making it up as you go along. Now, the problem with that is that you probably won't record properly what's working and what's not, and it will allow you to have some periods of reflection, and it's helpful if you can get someone else to help you to draw that out, just to try and work out where is this approach working better or not. Otherwise, you'll just carry on ploughing on and you'll just carry on experimenting without really taking into account the results from your experiments, if you know what I mean. You just every new sale is a new experiment, but it's improving. So you've got to try and bear that in mind, that if you're going to try a new bundling strategy or a new pricing strategy or a new way of delivering it, then monitor those that you do use that for and those that you don't and see if you get a better result. Otherwise, you're just sort of flapping around. So that's that one. And the other one is around the metrics and the accountability. You cannot escape it in a large firm. You're going to be measured to high heaven. And that's because they'll have KPIs all over the place and everybody's being, all up the hierarchy. They're being given strict targets to do. You don't have to do that in a small firm. And because you don't have to, you don't do it. And yet, therefore, you're not being driven even by your own conscience. Yeah. So I think the message there is, even if at a small scale, try and give yourself some targets. It's only you're letting down, but it's a bit like doing exercise. You got to set yourself a target if you're trying to lose weight or get fit or whatever. Yep. Then having a few measures about, and don't try and go too far towards the end result. And I've seen this, we've had processes before where, how many new clients are you going to win this year? That's the result of so many other things that measuring yourself on that is too disjointed. Yeah. But how many calls am I going to make this week? Or how many networking events, how many webinars will I run? That's something you can do more deliberately. So maybe put some measures on the inputs in the early days, and then later on when you get more mature, you start measuring the outputs.
I think as well, if I was to put my fluffy hat on.
Have you got a fluffy hat?
I've got a fluffy hat.
You have not.
I've got a fluffy hat.
You'll bring it to work.
But,
I'll ask Mrs. Buckle.
Yeah, well, don't ask her.
Yeah, maybe that's bad.
But no, just say as well, you could even, as a small business, say, am I still enjoying this? Because I think there's the real danger, especially if you're on your own as well. I think that this can get all-consuming, and I've got to have all these processes, and you think you've got to have all these things that big companies have got. And, whilst, yes, that's a nice thing to aim for, you don't have to all have it in your own built on a day. But have a metric around, am I still enjoying it? Why did I start this in the first place? Yeah. Come back to that first principle. Why did I start it? Am I still enjoying what I'm doing? Because if you're not enjoying what you're doing as a small business, it's going to flow through into your sales, your delivery, everything.
Everyone could tell.
And so I think, and that accountability piece as well, having someone, there's loads of people, there's far more people out there, I think, that would be prepared to mentor or just offer that word of advice or just tell me how your business is doing. Let's have a list. There's loads of people out there that would do that for wanting of being asked.
Yeah. No, we covered that, I think, in a recent episode as well. Good point. Excellent. Well, I think that's scratched the surface of the difference between selling in a big company and a small company. It's hard. Whichever one you do, it's hard, right?
Yeah.
There's higher expectations in the bigger firm. It's more straitjacketed. You're more of filling in a process, whereas in the small firm, it's more free to vary it a bit, and it's perhaps more exciting maybe, but it's a lonely place to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with the sport. Good. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. That's a good round on that subject. Thank you very much as well for listening to another episode of the SME Growth Podcast, 110, I think we decided it was. Yep. Produced for you by Wellmeadow, and we do all sorts of stuff to help businesses with their growth strategies, especially around HubSpot platforms. So if you know somebody else that might be interested in that, then please forward on our details. And a special hello to Helen, who for some reason the other day subjected herself to 3 episodes of our podcast back to back on a long journey, and was kind enough to write us an email afterwards and tell us how good she thought they were. So thank you very much, Helen. That's very kind of you. If you know anybody else that wants to listen in, then you know what to do. Send them a link, point them to the YouTube site, or send them something on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. In the meantime, good luck with your business.